Good morning, everyone, and thank you for dialing into our webinar session this morning. My name is Misha Bristow. I am the Business Development Manager at Paycheck. I am joined this morning by Monica and Martin from Croner. We wanted to put this webinar together again for you guys. Some of you may have dialed into our webinar with Croner before. And basically, with everything that's going on right now, we felt like it was important for Croner to give you a breakdown and more of an understanding of what going into work is now going to be look like, and the considerations that need to happen for yourselves as employers in order to have your staff come back into the office. So Martin's gonna give you just a brief overview of himself, and then Monica the same, just to so you can get to know who they are. Martin.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Martin. I'm Business Development Manager for Croner. Some of you may also have been on the webinar a few weeks ago where we looked at HR and the implications of that through this pandemic. And over the last couple of weeks, people have started to look at how they now return back into the workplace. So as Misha said, we've looked to put this together for you. At Croner, we do two things. One is HR, one is health and safety. So it's about how we look towards returning to work in the new normal, whatever that's going to be, and as it develops over the next 12 to 24 months. So hopefully this morning we can give you some insight into some of the things you'll have to put into place for health and safety to create a safe working environment, whether that means back in offices or working from home. I also have with me this morning Julian Clark, who's one of our health and safety advisors. So when we come to the Q&A at the end of this presentation, Julian will help me with answering some of the questions. Monica Price is going to take us through the presentation this morning. Monica's also a health and safety expert, so I'll hand over to Monica now and she'll run through the presentation with you.
Thank you. Good morning, Misha, Martin, and everybody else who's joined us. It's my pleasure to be with you this morning. As Misha said, we're going to look at really how the businesses start reopening the workplace after lockdown. Obviously, this is a continually evolving situation. You know, Martin is speaking to clients and clients have got some concerns, of course, and hopefully we're going to help with some of those concerns today. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please take the opportunity to, jot down your questions, and then Martin and myself, we can help answer those at the end.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so if I just run you through the agenda for today's session then. So Monica will run you through preparing the building, so any considerations that need to happen before actually reopening. Preparing the workforce, so your staff are also most important, what their responsibilities will be within taking care of themselves and also their colleagues. Control access, any social distance plan within the office space, reducing touch points and increasing the cleaning regime, communicating for confidence, and as Monica and Martin have both said, there will be time for a question and answer session. So any questions that you do have throughout the session today, please feel free to pop them in the question box on the right hand side of your screen. We'll do our best, or Martin and Julian and Monica will do their best to answer as many as we can today. I know there's probably hundreds of questions that you all have, and as Monica has mentioned, this is ever changing, so everybody is learning as we go through this whole process. So anything that you do want to ask, please don't hold back. We'll be more than happy to answer. So I'm going to hand over to Monica now, who's going to run you through the presentation.
Lovely, thanks, Misha. So let's start then. So the very first thing you need to be thinking about before you even get your employees back into the workplace is to prepare the building. So building owners and tenants must work in partnership here. So you should already, or you need to get in contact if you're a tenant of a building, if you share premises at all, perhaps if you share an entrance, you need to be working together now. You've got to focus on worker safety. That's going to be paramount. So you've got to check all your building systems, what's in place, what fire systems in place. Perhaps you have a cleaner that comes in and but doesn't actually work with you. It's just a cleaner that's been hired to clean the whole building. So you need to also be looking at your cleaning procedures, changes to your cleaning scope, or any additional services. throughout the whole of the 50-page draft that the government produced, Boris Johnson produced, it talks repeatedly about cleaning. So cleaning is going to be something that you need to be in ahead of, and you need to have a grip of. Of course, you've got to agree policies with your landlord if there's a landlord there where it's appropriate, and of course engage with your suppliers. So, you know, complete inspections, remediations and repairs prior to reopening. What you don't want to do is have a building that's not prepared for your employees before they even arrive. So you need to be looking and putting measures in place, which is what we're going to talk about today, of course, to make sure that, you know, you've got to really go in there with a fresh eye and really look at your building and see if it's protecting not only you as an employer, but of course your employees. So how do you look at then preparing the workforce? Well, one of the first things you need to think about is decide who to return to the workplace and who continues to work from home. Now, if you've got employees on furlough, of course, we know the furlough is ever changing itself. You know, the government are looking to change it all the time. So again, this is where you need to take advice, take professional advice before you make any, you know, kind of concrete decisions. You know, from the start of August, for instance, there's going to be a review to support the transition back to work for employees. You know, so, you know, employers, you can bring back employees part-time, for instance. So, you know, if you may already be considering what are you going to do, who are you going to bring back off of furlough. What you need to be thinking here is your key workforce. So think about who you can perhaps decide to leave at home, because as Boris Johnson has said, you know, we want to try and bring the workplace back together, but also, you know, keep as many employees safe at home as you possibly can. Of course, if that pertains to your business, that's not always going to be possible, but where you can, you've got to kind of take a very structured approach to this, because the new normal isn't going to be the normal as we know it. The biggest thing you need to do, of course, is develop employee communications. Communication, again, is going to be very key to what's going to happen with your business. So you need to think about what your expectations are of your employees. You know, don't forget, many employees are going to be anxious. ACAS have recently done a poll, for instance, and 1 in 2 people working from home from this poll have said they feel isolated, and 7 out of 10 from this poll felt they were missing social interaction with others at work. So if you feel perhaps your employees are going to fare better in the workplace, not only for their mental health and well-being, but also for you as a business, then of course this must be taken into your consideration. What you mustn't do is not tell your employees what you're going to do. You know, you've got to let them know. Communication is very, very important. You've got to look at the anxiety of returning to the workplace. Lots of people are going to be very anxious. We're already seeing that through the media with the, you know, the support that Boris Johnson is really not getting on the opening of schools from June the 1st. You know, you need to think about and consider, is it going to be an anxious time for employees? And what can you do as an employer to try and alleviate some of that anxiety? And by communicating them and having a very structured approach to your opening of your workplace, that makes it easier for you and easier for the employees to understand exactly what's going on. Because trust me, you're going to be hit with lots of questions, I'm sure. So, you know, look at the anxiety, think about, you know, what your management planning is, and think about how you communicate. It's, as I say, very key at the moment. You're also going to need information on new policies and procedures. By now, of course, you will have a COVID-19 policy in place, but you need to look at things like your return to work policy. You need to be thinking about your working at home policy. You need to be thinking about your cleaning regime, your policies, your procedures on that. So that's going to be really key. So in other words, you've got to develop a really robust return to work plan. And part of that plan will include a risk assessment. A risk assessment is absolutely crucial. You need to be thinking about a risk assessment before your employees come to work. And that will ascertain the risks and the hazards, and obviously what you can do to maintain and alleviate some of those hazards and risks. So look at control access. This has come up, quite a lot. Martin is speaking with clients every day, many clients. And if you've got a shared building, shared access, perhaps a shared smoking area, for instance, all these things need to be taken into consideration. So you've got to control your entry points. Look at what's happening in your reception areas. No shared pens. There can be none of that now. Sharing is not good. So what we want to do is try and alleviate anything within your business where you're sharing. So look at how your shipping arrangements are done. Look at your dispatch. Does somebody come into your building and sign? What actually happens? It's going to be very difficult for businesses to kind of look at this and think, right, what do I need to do? But it's going to be very important. So you almost need to sit down, if you like, and have a kind of rundown of your day-to-day structure, what you do in your day, on your typical day, and see if any of those need to be included in your plan for a return to work policy. Look at your goods received area. If you've got goods coming in, how are they coming in? What measures have you got in place to ensure the safety of the employees that are actually receiving those goods? You might have to look at reconfiguring lobby areas, completely different. We're seeing this all the time. There may even, be totally new areas for you to sign in. So, you may decide not to do any of that because, again, it's a risk, but you need to have things in place because, of course, the security of the building is going to be paramount. You may have already been thinking about perhaps installing some plexiglass shields. Those have become very popular. We've seen those at supermarkets. We're seeing those at more and more stations. So this is something where that may be appropriate for you. It's really important that at this time, because this is all about access, so when people come into your building or shop or whatever it is, they're looking at the procedures you've got in place to ensure their safety. So implement visitor policies. That's going to be key. People are going to want to know that when they come into your building, they're going to be safe and secure. So, of course, PPE is going to be really important. Have perhaps a cleaning station where you've provided perhaps sanitizer, gels, cloths. These are the things that you need to be thinking about if indeed this is appropriate for your business. And the other thing to think about is lifts. This is not a good idea now to have loads of people go into a lift because the space is too confined. So if you're using a lift, then it's one person per lift, no more than two people, obviously depending on the size of the lift. You have to keep this 2-meter distance as an absolute minimum. And don't forget, that's the minimum. So really in your mind, you should be preparing for 4 meters, because then you know that if you've got it at 4, then if you go any below, if you go below that, then you're well within the range of the government's recommendations. So again, use the stairs. This is the time for exercise. If you have stairs, encourage people to use the stairs where possible. So you need to look at your social distancing plan. If you haven't already thought about this, Martin can help you with this, of course. But what you've got to think about is what you are doing. You've got to decrease your density and designate foot traffic plans, so i.e. one-way system. We've seen this already in supermarkets, and we're seeing this now in for instance, B&Q were all over the news where their system has proved to be very, very effective. We've got garden centres opening now. So again, it's all about what you're letting your customers, visitors and your employees know exactly what they need to do. So there's got to be kind of either floor markings, you can instigate floor markings, signage is going to be very, very important. And it shouldn't just be a handwritten, sign or something you've typed out. You need to make it a sign that people are going to take notice of. So you need to make your sign professional, perhaps with your logo. This says to your employees that you mean business, and it also says to your customers and visitors that you mean business. It means that you're taking this very, very seriously. So handwritten is not advisable. So you need to think about what you're going to do. And this is very easy now. There's many people online you can get signs for relatively cheaply, very cost effective, but it will have a very, very much better impact on your business. Install shields. I mean, unfortunately, we were all kind of, lots of offices now in particular have got open plan. So of course, this is not advisable now. So what you need to think about is how you are going to distance between these open plan offices. So again, shields may be appropriate. You may be able to, maybe already thinking, actually moving, as I say, reception desks or moving tables and chairs, completely rearranging your office. But of course, all this needs to be done before your employees even get to you. So this is where the risk assessment is going to be very, very useful to you. Use that as a tool to establish what you need to do. You've got to manage schedules. This can vary, from start to finish times, for example. But the government have advised that not all workers should be coming back at the same time. So if you've got a kind of a normal 9 till 5 or 8 till 4 routine, what you don't want is all your employees arriving at that time. So you need to think about a staggered opening time. Even if it's 10, 15 minutes, that can have a really good, effect on the way that people are accessing and exiting your building. Of course, we've got to prohibit shared use of small spaces. So if you've got any kind of small space, be it perhaps a copying room or perhaps an office supply room or even a kitchen, which we'll talk about, you need to think about those spaces, and you need to make sure that only one person at a time is going in that space. Video conferencing like we're doing today. Normally Martin and I would be doing a seminar and we'd be seeing you face to face. Video conferencing's become the new norm now for us. So consider that being a normal way to carry on with your business. Don't forget though, communication is going to be very key. So make sure that it is video conferencing. Make sure that your employees are actually seeing you, because what you don't want to do is make your employees feel isolated. And as I say, 1 in 2 people working from home are feeling very isolated at the moment. Of course, we've got to minimize face-to-face meetings. We don't know how long this is going to go on for. We are ever evolving, ever changing. At the moment, some shopping centres are looking to open from June the 1st, which is just over a week away. Realistically, is that going to happen? We don't know. And I think that's the key. So as a business, you need to prepare and do everything you possibly can to ensure that your business is safe for opening, safe for your employees, and obviously that you're compliant to the law. So specify seating arrangements for your employees. If you've got perhaps a rest area or an area where they gather, perhaps a smoking area outside, you've got to think about that loads of people can't be going there. I spoke to a business the other day and it was a shared building. And of course, the shared building shares the arrangements for smoking. Well, of course, you need to liaise with these businesses to ensure that you've not all coming out at the same time, or indeed reallocate your space for your particular employees. These are unprecedented times, so you need to be thinking a little bit out of the box. You need to be making sure you're doing as much as you possibly can. Redesign your spaces, as I've said. This is going to be key. It doesn't have to be an expensive procedure, but it may involve you just totally rearranging your office and perhaps putting your chairs and desks, separating them, and perhaps if you've got the opportunity to have another office, splitting your perhaps one office into 2 offices. Add panels between your desks. Again, there's going to be a cost involved with this, but if this is all you can do, then this is something that you absolutely need to consider. The good thing about if you do share a building, the landlords are being quite flexible at the moment. So if you have an opportunity to perhaps have another space, have another area, and that will be at a very low cost, then use that, make the opportunity for that. Because don't forget, this is the normal for the moment, but we sincerely hope we are going to get through this, and we will get through it. It's just that for the moment, and probably up until the end of this year, we've got to work in a different way. So enforce your stringent cleaning protocols. This is going to be absolutely key. If you haven't done so already, as I've said to you, if you look at the 50-page paper from the government, it's all about cleaning repetitively. So you need to think about what your cleaning protocols are for, especially for any shared spaces. Reduce capacity of spaces. So remove some chairs from large conference room. What you've got to do is think about having this 2-meter distance minimum in place throughout the whole of your workplace and your work area. So whatever that involves, whether that's a shop floor, whether that's an office space, whether that's a shared building, you've got to focus on what your business needs for you. And of course, if you are sharing, as I've said, then you do need to be liaising with other companies, particularly if you do share this shared access. So how do you reduce your touch points? The government have been quite specific here. So again, risk assessment. This is, again, so important, such an important thing for you to be doing. Think about your risk assessment. Think about your hygiene measures. Make sure that you've, as I say, you've got very, very robust cleaning protocols in place. What you've got to do is try not to touch anything. Now, of course, that's not possible, is it? In the real world, that's not possible. So what you've got to think about is how you can reduce that risk. So have a clean desk policy, for instance. Every morning, whenever your employees come in, give them the option to clean their own desks. To be honest, not many employees are going to be aggrieved at that, because they want to ensure that their desk, their space is clear. No sharing of anything. So if you're looking at things like marker pens, remote controls, door handles, light switches, these are shared, these are shared spaces, these are shared objects. So what you need to think about is who's cleaning those light switches, who's cleaning those door handles. Think about how you're going to do this. And it is, sometimes it is going to be very hard. I mean, as far as the food and kitchen or canteen, what they're saying, what they're recommending is actually you think about closing your canteens and your kitchens, because these are shared spaces. These are cupboards that are going to be opened by more than one person. Tea bags are going to be taken out from a canister for more than one person. We know that the COVID-19 lives on surfaces for up to 72 hours. So what you need to be thinking about is what is the best way and the safest way to reduce the risks for your employees. And if that means just closing the kitchen area or canteen area temporarily, then that's what you must do. But again, the risk assessment will highlight that for you and just ascertain exactly what you need to do. But certainly no sharing of any equipment, telephones, anything really where it's a shared. So if you've got desk hopping, that's got to stop. Shared desk area, that's got to stop. So you need to think about all of these things. And of course, you need to think about a space or perhaps a room where if you feel that somebody has got the symptoms of COVID-19, so either they're displaying cough, perhaps a fever, perhaps they're just feeling really unwell, or they've come into work with these symptoms, then you as a manager, as an employer, as a business owner, need to think about how you can isolate that person. But the key thing is here is your cleaning and disinfectant. So you need to think about what you can do, not only for you as an employer and for your business, but what are you providing? Many businesses are providing hand sanitizer and bottles of water for their employees now, and they're just putting them on their desks and they've got them there and that's theirs. They disinfect them all before they use them, and the person that's using them will probably disinfect them before they use them. But again, it reduces the risk. So even things like if you've got a shared water container, that a point where you go and have your water, that's not a good idea. So you need to stop that. And if that's the case, then you need to think about how your employees are going to get water throughout the day. So you can see there's lots of things to think about here. So again, the risk assessment will really help you and provide you with a tool that hopefully will enable you to look at the risks and the hazards and reduce those risks. So the main thing you need to do is communicate, as I've said, communicate with confidence. Ensure your leaders are aligned on the return to work plans. What you're doing now is involving everyone. You've got to establish a two-way communication. Create this trusting and transparent culture. Don't try and hide things for employees. If they're working with you, they've probably got some really good ideas, so use them. Use them in your risk assessment. Say, look, we've got this, what do you think we should do? They know that if they use it every day, they're going to have some idea of what they feel will be best to make it safe. Set clear employee expectations to make them feel secure. So give them information on new protocols, give them information on visitor policies, travel policies. Give them, let them have a true understanding of what's going on. And as I say, recognize their fear and anxiety in those returning. So, consider the employment assistance program. If you haven't got one of those in place, have a chat with Martin on that, because we offer a very good system. If you've got an occupational health program, again, now's the time. If you've got a health and wellbeing program, now's the time to kind of bring that to the forefront and remind your employees that this is what you're offering, and this is how this is how they can go somewhere where it's confidential, where perhaps they don't want to talk to you about their fears and anxieties, but they can go somewhere where it's safe, a safe, confidential environment for them to speak. And of course, continue to test, continue to look at what you're doing, measure it, validate it, and adapt. This is not going to be something you can put in place and then just leave it on the shelf, because it's ever evolving, and because we're on this lockdown, a more relaxed lockdown now. But what we're hoping for within the next 3 weeks, which will be just over a week's time, we'll get another government announcement to tell us exactly what's happening, and please let the R rate be going down. But we don't know. So because we don't know, your plans have got to be flexible. So you've got to ensure that your employees know that this is a flexible, ongoing, ever-evolving process. So look at your return phases. As I've said, it's not going to be good now for you to bring everybody back at work at the same time. So if you can have a phased return, look at perhaps, what are you doing? Look at your key workers. Can you stagger their hours? Can you bring some workforce in and perhaps, work certain days a week, as long as they're doing their hours that they're contracted to do? But what you've got to think about short term is prepare for the new normal, which isn't going to be anything like we've seen before. Then test and validate, look at what you've put in place and see if it's actually working. And then long term, the most important thing for you as a business, of course, and we recognize this, is for you to be profitable. So you need to think about all the things you're doing, what it's doing, and how is it affecting your business, and can it make your business as profitable as it was, and even more so in the future. And the progress, is unlikely to be linear. It isn't, because you've got contamination. We may have a second wave of infection. We just don't know. They're trying vaccines at the moment with Oxford University, but the trials probably won't even start until September at the earliest. So the closest, really, realistically, we're looking at a vaccine would most likely be next year. So things to consider. Changes to the current lockdown restrictions are likely to be slow and gradual, as I've said. They may fluctuate with stricter measures imposed. And again, you're going to have to be prepared to act on those. We know the types of controls that every employer will need to consider, but use this time to prepare and plan. You've got to prepare and you've got to plan. Communicate with your staff, as I've said, is going to be key. And that goes whether it's bad news or good news. It could be, and we sincerely hope not, that if the R rate goes up, a lockdown will be imposed even more vigorously again. So it means that businesses, again, even though we're considering opening, would have to be forced to close. So we don't want that. So that's why it's really important that you've got these kind of steps and measures, the social distancing in place to ensure that you're doing everything you can. And a degree of security is important in these very uncertain times, and that's absolutely true. Your employees are going to be very uncertain about the future of your business. So again, communicate with them what you're trying to do. Get them on board. Make them, if you could show them that you care about them, care about their health, care about their well-being, then they're going to feel valued. And a valued employee is going to be a loyal employee to you during these troubled times. So as I say, let the staff know they're valued and supported. Let them communicate with them and say, really appreciate all you're doing. We appreciate it's difficult at the moment. So consider, when was the last time you communicated with your employees? Are you on a daily communication with them if they're working from home, say, for the moment? Just a 10-minute quick hello, how are you doing? It's not necessarily all about work, but just looking after them, make them feel valued. That's going to be very important. So just to summarise, provide adequate physical distancing, goes without saying. Either markers on the floor, signage is going to be very important here. You've got to, and don't think you're overdoing it, because you probably aren't. Because, common sense, as we found, with the relaxed lockdown, sometimes isn't always the best. So you need to be considering your employees and saying, look, rather have it so that it's very, very clear, layman's terms, what you're going to do, than have a confused state where people actually don't know what they're going to do or meant to be doing. Home working should be maintained where possible. That's what the government has recommended. Ensure your people remain engaged and supported, and consider these flexible working arrangements to reduce peak commuting times. Again, thinking about the commute, if any of your employees have got to get a bus or a train, think about how they're going to do that journey. So, consider their journey, consider all these flexible working arrangements. Staggered use of shared facilities, as I've said, such as canteens, or consider closing it altogether. Maintain good hand hygiene and clean working areas. Redesign your space. Make sure it's a longer term solution. Look out for people being overloaded. Lots of people would be very keen to help and support your business. Most of your employees will be very keen to do that, but just be aware that you're not overloading that person. And communicate your changes before the return. This is to reduce the anxiety, and establish your protocols to ensure, before returning, you've got very safe practices in place. The Telegraph reported last week that the government are considering rushing through changes to the law where, which gives employees a right to work from home as part of the COVID-19 return to work effort. So this is going to protect employees who feel perhaps that their health and safety is being put at risk by returning to work. And also it's going to help employers who are struggling to make their workplace COVID-19 secure. So it is ever changing, it is ever evolving. So this is the time to take professional, clear advice from us before you do anything at all. And that's me finished. So I'd like to perhaps pass over to Misha and Martin and Julian, obviously for the Q&A. But of course, if I can help in any way, of course. But hopefully that's given you a kind of an insight and enlightenment to what you should be doing. And I'll pass it back to you, Misha. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Monica. So hopefully that's, to be honest, answered a lot of questions already that you guys might have already had prior to the webinar today, if you were considering reopening your office. So I'll run through the questions that we do have, but still keep them coming, because I know that sometimes when someone else asks a question, that triggers something for yourself. So if you think of anything as we go through, still send them. We have time to go through them. So Martin, if I start by asking, for businesses that are okay to work from home without it affecting the business but employees feel isolated, what would the recommendation be?
Okay, thanks, Misha. From an HR perspective, it's a bit of an odd one, and we're all, those of us that are still currently working, I'm an example of that. I work from home, but it is a very isolated environment. There are things you can put in place as an employer. One of those, as Monica mentioned, is employee wellbeing, which effectively gives them access. So if they do feel isolated, they can pick up the phone and have a chat with somebody. They can use the application to go through, and it gives them tools in terms of mental well-being, keeping them active whilst we're all isolated, and things that you can put into place as an employer. I know we do, for example. Even just everybody jumping on a video call once a day, not for any purpose other than to chat or catch up with the rest of the team, is a really good idea, just so that they all still as involved with each other as they were before.
Perfect, thank you. What type of risk assessment do I have to put in place to return to my office or to the office?
Okay, Julian, if you don't mind, I'm going to throw that one over to you.
No problem. Yeah, the risk assessment needs to be COVID specific. So we've set up a load of templates on our Bright Safe system, which will have the sector specific risk assessments guidance. So you're looking at things like what happens if you're meeting members of the public, your communal areas, which was brought up in the presentation there, looking at your communal areas. So that'll need to be in your COVID risk assessment, how you're handling the communal areas, not just within your own business, but within other businesses that could be in your office block, for example. So those things will still need to be in there, because you need to be interfacing with those. How you interface with members of the public, that will also need to be in there. For businesses that are in manufacturing, for example, they'll need to have how they're dealing with working with the equipment they're using. Is it single use, or are multiple people using the same bit of equipment? If you're a joinery, if you've only got one table saw, how are you going to use the table saw and you've got 5 joiners using one table saw? So having cleaning regimes, that'll need to be in there. and needs to be written and recorded, and make sure you've communicated. The important thing is communicated it out to your employees and making sure they understand what their controls are.
Perfect, thank you, Julian. So we've had a couple of questions about retail. So if I just kind of summarise those questions. Someone said, how can I work with customers picking up merchandise? And someone's also said, we work in a retail business where social distancing is difficult. What can we do to make it as safe as possible?
Okay, so there's guidelines that have been put in place by the HSE in terms of what you can and can't do. Retail is a tricky one because, as you've probably seen with some of the places that are open, there are a number of things you can do. For example, you can limit the number of people allowed in the store or the environment at the same time. There are markings that I'll ask Julian for in a second to run through, but there are things you can put into place to effectively not enforce social distancing, but make it as possible as you can. Julian, can you run through like the guidance in terms of signage and everything?
Yes, I mean, you need to have signage in place. So one of the things that the government came out with, the new guidance that came out on the 11th of May last week, was there's a poster campaign. So there's a poster campaign saying there's 5 steps that companies need to comply with. So having that poster on your front door of your retail establishment will ensure that you've maintained the controls that the government guidelines are been issuing out. So having that available is key, and then having the documentation behind that to back that up. So make sure you've got the COVID risk assessment, hand washing regimes, people working from home if they can, your 2 meters distance in the workplace, trying to keep that. If they can't keep a 2 meter distance, how you manage the transmission risk, and having those controls in place will be important.
Thank you. Next question, what do we do about fire doors? Can they be propped open?
Straight to you, Julian.
Yes. No, basically, unless you've got an emergency release, you can get an emergency release for a fire door. So which it clicks in place, and if the fire alarm goes off, it releases the door. So a lot of modern offices will have that facility, and if you have that facility, you can use it. But propping fire doors, you potentially could be, if the HSE did come in and found fire doors propped open, they could put an improvement notice on you or a prohibition notice on you. It'd probably be an improvement notice. My experience, there was a company in Canterbury that were a second-hand China shop that sold faulty sort of seconds china, and outside Canterbury Cathedral, and they actually got prosecuted because they had a fire door that was chained shut while they were open, and they got prosecuted £100,000, I think it was, over, and it shut the business. So you can't prop fire doors open, and you can't lock them either.
Thanks, Julian. Next question is, does the office space need to be cleaned daily?
Go on, Julian, I'll let you do this one.
All right, thank you. No problem. It depends on your risk assessment. Again, I would say daily for certain areas will be okay, but when we went through your frequently touched and surface where you're going to have people going in and out frequently, your kitchens, your toilet facilities, welfare facilities, they will need cleaning more regular than daily will be expected. And the same with if you're in a shop, the doors on a shop, again, you might, if you're controlling it with a security guard. I know there's some shops around our place who've got security guards. They actually sometimes they've got an empty set to wipe, and they're wiping it down after every visit. Everyone goes in when they push the door, or they're opening the door for the shoppers. So it depends on that, but it's depending on what you've got in your risk assessment. But it will need to be more frequently than daily for certain areas where you got frequently contact.
Perfect, thank you. Martin, can you reopen the office for those who want to go in who don't have the same comfort at home, for example, second screen or comfy or appropriate chair?
Potentially, yes. That depends on obviously what provisions you put in place to make the office a safe working environment. Those are things we can help with. There is also an HR piece to that as well, because it's about making sure that you've got the right policies and procedures in place from an HR perspective to bring people back off furlough if there's enough work available. From a health and safety perspective, it comes down to how safe the office environment is. That's something that we can help with. I mean, following the webinar anyway, I'll send everybody an email in terms of us being able to provide an hour's free health and safety consultancy, where you can also ask HR questions as well if you want to review individually where you guys are at in terms of health and safety and what your potential plan is for returning. But that will come afterwards. But the answer is yes, potentially it should be fine if you've got your staff that want to go in. That's a good starting point, and then it's about making sure that when you send them in, the things are there for them that make it a safe environment.
Perfect, thank you. So we've had a couple of questions regarding shared offices and also PPE. So if I kind of put those together as well, someone said, when working in a shared office space at TOG, can we request PPE from them, or would it be down to each business to purchase shields, sanitizers, surface disinfectants, etc.? And someone's also said, whose responsibility is it to supply PPE if we're reopening the office?
Okay, so specifically about shared office space, from a health and safety perspective, you become responsible the moment that your staff effectively come into the office environment that is your office. So from the building perspective, the building will obviously have to put provisions in place in order to make it a safe environment for their tenants. Julian, in terms of PPE, who does that come down to? Is it the employer?
It's the employer, yes. The employer must provide PPE. Please bear in mind with PPE that statutory PPE, if you're a business that requires statutory PPE for chemical or dust and things like that, that still has to be provided. So your FFP3 type mask, which for chemical exposure, are still mandatorily required. So it doesn't mean you can wear sort of the mask that you can make your own sort of mask, and that won't be sufficient for doing chemical type protection. So the existing chemical statutory protection still needs to be in place if you're in that sort of environment. And the face mask the medical type face mask is to protect the individual distributing the COVID, not the other way around.
Perfect, thank you. And in terms of we're in a shared building, we can't control what other tenants do, so how do we keep our staff safe?
Yeah, absolutely. This a bit of this comes down to what the landlord puts in place in terms of the building as well. So what they make their tenants do in order to be returning to the premises. I think we all have to bear in mind that landlords will want their tenants back as soon as possible, because in some cases landlords have obviously reduced rent while tenants aren't actually in the premises. So in terms of what you can do with other tenants, there are, and this is the dark side of this, unfortunately, the HSE have been given a pot of money to review any potential health and safety concerns. So there will always be the option if the landlord is not complying, or if, for example, there's other tenants in the building that are absolutely not complying with the restrictions, that you'll have the ability to report that. In terms of making the staff safe, that's a decision that you'll have to make as employers as we go along. Julian, is there any other guidance around that?
No, not really. I mean, the communication to your co-inhabiting companies, what your procedures are being. So you might issue that out to them and say, this is what we're doing, and asking the question what they do, because there is a bit in legislation under the Health and Safety Work Act of you're each responsible to each other under legislation on the Health and Safety Work Act. So you do have some communication between the two when you're co-inhabiting buildings, especially in the current climate.
Perfect, thanks both. Who is going to be monitoring whether we are doing enough?
Okay, so that goes back to the beginning of the last answer, really. It's the HSE, and this I think it was Monday, Tuesday last week when the announcements first came out in terms of trying to get people to go back to work. Very much so, they were encouraging people to report to the HSE if they didn't feel like employers or businesses were complying with restrictions that were put into place and staggered opening. So that will be the HSE that will be monitoring that.
Amazing. I've got another shop/retail one. Should I insist that all customers wear masks and hand out gloves to them?
Julian?
there's no immediate requirement. If you can keep your customers at a 2 metre distance, then no. I mean, the face mask thing is there's still some research going on in that and how it prevents the spread of the COVID. And they're obviously using it in the medical and care community where they're in close contact with people who have COVID or are positive for COVID or have COVID symptoms. Whereas in the workplace, it's not a mandatory requirement at the moment. But that may change. I know there's some new guidance coming out for example, for schools. It's coming out today. Now, it might have already come out this morning. I don't know. I was on watching Question Time last night, and the minister who was on that, I can't remember his name, he announced that there was a new guidance for schools coming out today, for example. And from a safety point of view, it's unprecedented, the amount of guidance, new guidance that's coming out. Normally we only have it twice a year. Now we're having it twice a day. So
what happens if someone says my office isn't safe and doesn't want to come back to work?
Okay, so that's a combination of HR and health and safety. So I've had this quite a few times over the last few weeks where I've been speaking to clients and potential clients about from an HR perspective, you've got in some cases a lot of the staff that are sat at home on furlough. And there's been a few different things, for example, like I don't want to come back to work because I live with somebody who's shielding or I live with somebody who's got asthma. And then also you've had the people coming back saying, I don't want to come back to work because I don't feel like you've done it. I don't feel safe coming to work if, for example, they do work in a shop. They don't feel safe serving customers through the day. Ultimately, the government is trying to get everybody to come back to work. Now, if there is no specific reason why they can't come to work, i.e. they're not shielding themselves, and there's work available because the shop, for example, is reopening or the office is returning to work or the factory is reopening, then that becomes an HR conversation around that they can't stay on furlough because the business itself can't use the job retention scheme if there is work available. So then it's a case of following through a pretty complex process to either put the employee on unpaid leave or a period of absence, whether that's holiday or unpaid leave. Then from a health and safety perspective, it's about the business being, again, it goes back to the communication that we were talking about through the presentation, in the business showing the employee what they've put into place to make it a safe working environment for them. The two are coupled together because that will put you in a really strong position from an HR perspective to get staff to come back to work, because there are going to be cases where people have sat at home on furlough for 3 or 4 months and don't want to come back to work.
Yeah, thank you. Can I change my employee hours to stagger shifts?
Okay, again, HR, so yes, potentially. That's part of what we're doing where we're rewriting contracts and handbooks for people. So it's a consultation period with the employees because ultimately you have to get agreement when you are changing hours, unless, of course, they're in what we would call, say, a 0-hour contract or a contract that doesn't specify the hours and days that they work. Now, in terms of from an HR perspective, it's a case of if you guys were in touch with us, we would be guiding you through the process to consult with the employees to explain why from a business perspective and what the business case is that you have to do it, and then guiding them through the process to get them to agree to those changing terms. Because as we know, with furlough potentially changing on the 1st of August, the idea behind the job retention scheme changing is where we start to stagger and the government pays some of the bill for employee wages, and hopefully employers can get staff to come back at least part-time in some industries. And if that's the case, unfortunately, you will still have to get a legal agreement from the employees to change their contracts accordingly, whether temporary or permanent. And that's something that there is a process for that we help with.
Amazing, thank you. That's all the questions that we have had come through. Someone has asked if we'll be sending the slides on email. I will be sending a recording out, so if you would specifically like the slides, please can you pop me an email? My email address is on screen in the bottom left. I know Martin has also offered some support, so if any of you would like to have a further discussion with Martin, then his details are also on screen. But yeah, I will send a link to the recording at the end of the session today. Keep the questions coming through. As I said, Martin's available, so you can send them through to him. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to help answer anything or point you in the direction of somewhere where you may be able to get the answer to any questions that you do have. I know sometimes when you come away from something, have time to reflect, questions start coming through. So thank you all for dialing into the session today. Thanks so much to Monica, Martin and Julian for hosting with myself this morning. I hope that we've managed to take away some stresses away from you and any concerns that you might have had prior to the session today. But I hope you all keep safe as always, and have a lovely long bank holiday weekend.
Thank you, Misha.
No problem. Take care, everyone. Bye. Bye.
All the best, guys. Bye. Stay safe.
Bye bye.